Look at me wearing a singlet. Do you know how long it's been since I've worn a singlet? The last time I wore a singlet was doing this video, if you wanted to check that out. Yeah, I don't usually wear singlets, but I thought I would wear one, seeing as I'm reviewing a Fast and Furious movie. Here we are in 2023, me wearing singlets. Alright, so we have made it up to the Fate of the Furious, and I haven't, to be completely honest with you, I have not seen this movie in quite a while. In fact, when it first came out, I watched it a few times, remember really loving it, but after rewatching it after so much time, I think this is actually one of my favorite Fast and Furious movies in the entire franchise. To get right into it, this is a far more emotional entry into the franchise than literally any of its other predecessors. It definitely, in my opinion, has a more well-rounded story than the last movie. It's more straightforward and easy to follow, and it's more investing, I guess, for specific reasons that I will get into. But in regards to where it falls in my favorite movies of the franchise, I have previously stated many times that my favorites are the first one and Fast 5, and after, reviewing these films, I am reconsidering that a lot, especially with this film. Fast 5 is definitely still up there, but the Fate of the Furious definitely is like the Fate of the Furious and the Fast and the Furious are competing in my head as to which one is actually better. I think it might be this one. I don't know, it took me so long to come to that conclusion because there's so many of these movies, and I hadn't seen this movie in a while. I mean, I hadn't seen any of these movies in a while, even though I have been growing up with them. I usually just watch them when they come out, watch them a few times, and then move on. So in that, I'm very glad that I'm reviewing these movies. So the big selling point, or the big hook for this movie, because there's always a hook, there's always a selling point with each recent Fast and Furious movies since Fast 5. This time around, it is the fact that Dom has turned against his team and they now have to go against him with the help of the villain from the last movie. Now, there was a lot to unpack with just that short synopsis, so I'm just gonna go right in by talking about the motivation behind Dom's actions. His motivations for this movie is what makes this movie, for me, the most emotional, dramatic, and compelling entry in the franchise, because of why Dom is forced to go against his team. And if you haven't had a chance to see this movie yet, I'm not going to spoil it in case you're one of those people that hasn't caught up with the Fast and Furious franchise by this point. What are you doing with your life? That's what I'm asking you. But what happens in this movie, his reason for doing what he does was completely unexpected for me. I did not see it coming. It was very surprising when you get to a certain point in the movie and something happens. This movie leaves you with your blood boiling, or at least for me, it did. This is one of those stories where you are right there with the character, feeling exactly what they are feeling, and you want to do something. And it's because of Dom's motivation in this movie, and the reason why he's been pushed to do what he has to do in this movie is why we get to see Vin Diesel show his acting chops, because he doesn't usually get to show his acting chops in his movies, whether that be because of just the characters he plays or because he just doesn't have that many acting chops to show. Regardless of whatever is of that reason is, I think Vin Diesel does a pretty darn good job in this movie. When Dom is being pushed, we feel pushed. When he's feeling, angry and upset and wanting to do something, we also feel that. Vin Diesel as an actor, I honestly think doesn't get enough credit. I don't know him personally. I haven't seen that many movies of his, so I can't say whether or not he's if he's a good enough actor or not, but I just think his performance for this movie was pretty good, in my opinion. It also helps that this movie doesn't have as many of the ridiculous lines from Furious 7, because in Furious 7 there are a lot of ridiculous lines, like for example that one line where Dom goes, "Time to unleash the beast." If a line like that was in this movie with this sort of tension and drama, then it would take away from it and it wouldn't work as well. And I didn't have a problem with the over-the-top and ridiculous one-liners from Furious 7. I'm just saying that if it were in this movie, it would conflict with the drama and the tension that is on display in the story. That being said, this movie is not the realistic entry in the franchise. If anything, it gets even more over the top and ridiculous for the action specifically. So yes, The Fate of the Furious holds to that tradition of being over the top and ridiculous. But I'm going to jump back to the villains for a second, because these are the types of villains that you love to hate. There's not too much of an emotional reason behind what they do. They don't have like any real good motivation, and they are just the types of villains that you love to hate. That's why they work in this movie, and the actors behind them, like Charlize Theron, does a really good job at, you know, portraying that she's a bitch in this movie. I fucking hate her. The villains in the Fast and Furious movies didn't get good until Luke Evans, and in that movie, we also didn't understand his motivation too well. This movie finally explains Luke Evans', you know, motivation for being the villain in that movie. And admittedly, it feels like they were just filling in the gaps of the story by you know, trying to explain Owen Shaw's motivations in Fast and Furious 6, and it doesn't make him any less of a dick. He's still a dick, he's still a villain, but you can clearly see that Charlize Theron in this movie is like the Thanos level villain of this franchise. What she's doing, whatever her reasons are, she's clearly insane and a bitch, and you want to see her die, but she doesn't, which pisses me off. Maybe I'm getting a bit too invested. Anyway, let's talk about another villain, that being Deckard Shaw. Now, I get some people who watch these movies will see him and be like, oh, he was also a dick. Why is he now the good guy all of a sudden? Well, that's because his motivation in the last movie was actually a very real and human motivation, at least in my opinion. I saw a lot of similarities between him and Dom. The fact that Deckard Shaw was trying to avenge his brother. Clearly, Deckard Shaw values family as much as Dom does. This may verge on spoilers a little bit, but not really, because it doesn't spoil anything in the story, so I'm just going to say it anyway. Deckard Shaw is talking to another character and brings up his brother and says, oh, he's a lost cause. So clearly, even though he was trying to avenge his brother, he doesn't think that highly of his brother, and Owen Shaw is probably the black sheep of the family. In regards to Owen Shaw, I think they tried to explain his motivations for what he was doing in Fast and Furious 6 after the fact, but when it comes to Deckard Shaw, they've actually done a pretty good job, in my opinion, of fleshing out his character and explaining or showing to us that he's actually nothing like his brother. So it was really fun seeing Deckard Shaw come back and be a part of the team, because clearly they are, you know, setting up Hobbs and Shaw, which we knew about when this movie came out. We knew that they were trying to set that up. And I think with Furious 7 and now this movie, they did a really good job at setting up this new character in the franchise, who is actually one of my favorite characters in the franchise now because of these movies. And as I said, this is probably the most emotional entry in the franchise. For me, it's very close to Fast 5. I honestly forgot about this movie because it's been a while since I've seen it. Yeah, so if I were to rank the movies, I'm not going to rank all of them, but if I were to like give you my 3 favorite, this would be in the top 3. This, Fast and the Furious, and Fast 5 being the number 1. Anyway, that is my review for The Fate of the Furious? Yeah, The Fate of the Furious. I will see you in my review for Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw. Longest movie title ever. Holy shit. I'll see you in that review. Alright, so we have made it up to... One second. When Dom is being... Fuck me dead. Fuck. I can't smile when I say this shit. Don't mind me, just biting my nails. See my muscles. See my scrawny arms? There's no muscles.